Yesterday, I tried to give you some background to Sri Aurobindo's life and the context in which Savitri came about, and one or two points I emphasized, and that the primary thing was that most of the thinkers, philosophers in India have addressed themselves to a particular context, a particular challenge. As a result, if you read Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and his understanding, interpretation of Hinduism, you will find it's almost Christian Hinduism. And again he tries to highlight those values in Hinduism which are the strength of Christianity. You don't blame any one of these people that because they understood the context in which they were presenting this. Similarly, if you go back to Shankaracharya, whom I regard as the savior of the Hindu tradition, although Sri Aurobindo has serious differences with Shankaracharya himself, but Shankaracharya was operating in a context. Hinduism was on the verge of elimination from the Indian subcontinent. That was the stage. Shankaracharya re-established the Hindu tradition. Now, as we all know, we don't owe allegiance to religions as our great-grandfathers did. But I still believe Shankaracharya has done a great service to humanity, primarily because the Hindu tradition is a tradition of free worship, is a tradition which does not hug the past and reject the future. If there is any one tradition, any one spiritual tradition, which is constantly sensitive to the new, to the constantly manifesting facets of an evolving truth, it is Hinduism. So I would like the Hindu tradition to continue in this world, because if that tradition goes, religion will be a closed book. There is no thinker who has said God's book is not yet closed, but people like Vivekananda very clearly said there are several unwritten pages to God's book. Of course, we have had great scriptures, we had the Vedas, we had the Upanishads, but our tradition doesn't believe with the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Puranas and the Tantra and so on. God has exhausted himself, there is no new truth that is to emerge. And this emphasis on truth as something that constantly evolves, as the human spirit evolves, is the greatest thing that we can offer to the world. Hinduism, if at all Hinduism has a contribution to make, it is to make people realize that the Christian wisdom doesn't end with the Bible, or the Islamic wisdom doesn't have to end with the Quran. This thing is a constantly growing facet, and that is why Hinduism has to be saved. Not because we like our gods, their faces, we like our modes of worship, but this is primarily, Bertrand Russell talked about a free man's worship. So if there is any tradition which talks about man's spirit being free to pursue truth, to have new manifestations, new aspects of truth, the whole idea of Sanatana, Hinduism is called Sanatana Dharma. Unfortunately, Sanatana simply doesn't mean, as many people think Sanatana means ancient. One of the definitions of Sanatana is Nitya Nutan, something that is constantly new. If it is not constantly renewed, if it's not constantly new, it gets out of step with the human aspiration, with the human needs, and that is the time to discard religion and for man to grow beyond religions. As many people have said, Hinduism is a good religion to be born in, but not it's a good religion to die in. You must grow beyond the bounds of religion. Now this is the spirit that I think is essentially Hindu, and that I think is what Shankaracharya tried to save, but he was trying to do it in the context of Buddhism, and therefore Shankaracharya, as you know, came to be recognized as a Prachanna Buddha. They said this chap is only a hidden Buddha. He doesn't, basically he's a Buddha because the language that he used, the logic that he used was the logic of Buddhism. Similarly, when Vivekananda talks about it, Vivekananda had a function to perform and he does it extremely well. So does Mahatma Gandhi for his purposes. But Sri Aurobindo was not, as I said yesterday, addressing any of these limited contexts. And when I traced his life, I pointed out Sri Aurobindo's primary concern until he turned to yoga was the nation. Why is it that our nation is so fallen? Why is it that a nation once famed for its riches, Vasco da Gama and Columbus and so on, they wanted to find a trade route to India, not because they wanted to come and study the Gita and the Upanishads, but they had heard that in India, diamonds are sold like potatoes in the street markets. India was so rich. That's why we want a piece of the action. So I very often tell my audiences in India, the reason for which your sons and sons-in-law today are going to Singapore and to England and San Francisco was the reason why people like Columbus and these people wanted to come to India. That is the great country we belong to. That is the great tradition we belong to. So this is the whole tradition of India. And Sri Aurobindo was not addressing any of these limited contexts. As I said, he was addressing the context of man as an evolutionary being. And I pointed out, you can choose whether you want to call yourself a Hindu or a non-Hindu, whether you want to call yourself a Christian or a non-Christian, Muslim or a non-Muslim. But you have no choice. You are an evolutionary being. You can't say, I want to get out of evolution. You can't do that. We are born here in the process of evolution. How did we get born? Did somebody drop us? We are born here the same way the trees are born, the same way the animals are born, the same way the birds are born. That's how we are born. So we are carriers of evolution. In this matter, you have no choice whatsoever. And that's why Sri Aurobindo believes in this world, everybody is a yogi. Some people are consciously yogis. Some people are unconsciously yogis. Nature makes use of them to carry its own yoga. Evolution, what Darwin called evolution, in Sri Aurobindo's term, evolution equals nature's yoga. Nature is in yoga. Nature carries out this yoga, and just in yoga, as you say, is an evolution of consciousness. You can see this, what is called evolution, like at one time there was nothing but matter, then came life, then came mind. This is an evolution of nature. And so, this evolution is nature's yoga. In that sense, Sri Aurobindo says, you cannot escape being a yogi. We are all yogis. All that we have to choose is whether you want to be a conscious yogi or just being made use of nature, and without your being aware of it, you are contributing to this. Now, this is the context in which Sri Aurobindo was addressing all philosophical problems. He draws his roots. His roots are in the Hindu tradition, but as you know, a part of his being was formed here in the West, and so for him, it's not difficult to bring together Yajnavalkya, Valmiki, and Darwin and Karl Marx. All these things are brought together, and therefore you find a kind of global view. He doesn't ever talk about, particularly after he turned to yoga, he did say a great deal about India, India's future and so on, but he's constantly talking about the human situation, the human condition, and therefore the human condition, he says, is the same everywhere. Whether you are Russian or American or Indian, the manifestations of the problem are different because of the certain history, but essentially it's the same problem. Man is caught up, imprisoned in an evolutionary crisis, and the way to beyond this crisis is what you have to find, and that's the reason I pointed out to you. Sri Aurobindo went to Pondicherry, was there for 40 years. The world misunderstood him. Indian leaders misunderstood him. Gandhi and Nehru misunderstood him. They thought probably he was lost in some kind of spiritual ecstasy, couldn't care less for the world. But this was not true. As you all know, Sri Aurobindo was the first Indian to warn during the Second World War that Hitler was a monster. And he declared, this is my war, this is divine's war. And for the first time, the radio was installed in the ashram. Until then, ashram didn't even have a radio. And he would listen to the news broadcast every time the broadcast was made, as if he was himself the general organizing the army. He was very watchful, and it's very clear, those of us who have read his life, he must have given at least from 1939 to 45 a major part of his time and effort to this. And he said, I am going to help this war, I am going to help the Allies, but my help will go in the spiritual way, in the occult way, and not in the material way. So the point I am trying to make is, this is not a yoga, this is not a philosophy of people who are recluses, people who are fed up of life, people who think life is all an illusion and we want for ourselves a private heaven or a private paradise somewhere and the kingdom of God is all within. He wanted perfection, perfection of life to be realized here on earth. One of the great things Sri Aurobindo said is, this world belongs to matter. Even if God wants to come down here, he has to obey the laws of matter. And because the West showed great respect for matter, the West is where it is now. But matter is not the end of the story. There is another aspect to life which is called spirit. And West has not been able to pay to the spirit the same attention that was paid to spirit in India. In India, any path to the spirit we have explored it. Any path to God we have explored. As a result, we have a rich spiritual tradition, rich spiritual culture, but harmonization of spirit and matter is what we lacked. And he says, just as the West has neglected the spirit, in general we neglected matter, and therefore both have half the truth in their grasp, the other half we have to get in. And so humanity is now developing into a unified civilization, into a unified culture, and he was addressing this context. And that's why Sri Aurobindo is as relevant to Indians as he is to the British, as he is to the Americans, because this is the context we all share. This was the point I was trying to make yesterday, and it is from this context that Savitri arose. Now there are a number of things one could say about Savitri. Savitri is a peculiar book in the sense you can go on mystifying it. You can go on talking about it in the mysterious terms and so on, but if I try to do it after 2 days, I will lose all my audience. But they will say, this man came from India, he was very mystical and very mysterious, he spoke of very high things. So there are many high things one could say about it, but it is not, I don't have the competence to say those high things. I have the same competence that you have. So I guess I'll therefore be able to share some of my research findings in Savitri, and therefore will operate on a more human level. Now, the story, as I told you, the Savitri story itself comes from the Vedas. It is a Vedic myth. All cultures need myths. Without any myths very often represent the deepest and the highest ideals of a race. Now, our highest ideal, as you know, was enunciated in the Upanishadic prayer, Asatoma Sadgamaya and so on, Mrityor Mam Amritam Gamaya. This quest for immortality was the myth behind this Savitri story. But when it comes to Puranas, Puranas is like, popularization of Veda. It's a popular, as a result, when you popularize it, sometimes the significance is brought down to the level of the ordinary person. So the Savitri story became, as I was saying yesterday, became a paradigm example of a woman's duty to her husband and conjugal fidelity. Satyavan was dead and Savitri was able to bring him back because of her great conjugal fidelity to her husband. As I was saying yesterday, if Sri Aurobindo is writing this story in the 20th century, he should write about husband's fidelity to the wife and not perpetuate this myth. But this is not a story of any fidelity. It's not that kind of a story at all. It's a totally different story. Many of my university professors have very often spoken to me about this. They say, what is it? Why does he write about Savitri? After all, there are many stories he could have written about. Why does he write about Savitri? Well, there is a reason why he chose the story of Savitri, and he used it, as he said, a legend and a symbol. He narrates the legend, he tells you the story, but his primary purpose is not to tell you a story, because everybody knows the story. But he needs a framework through which he can express, he can give to humanity what he wants to give, his vision of man's future, his understanding of man's past, all these things he can give. So what I will now do is briefly narrate Savitri's story, not so much to tell you the story, but to emphasize in what ways his treatment of the story is different from the Puranic treatment. As I said, the story comes in Markandeya's narration to Yudhishthir. After Yudhishthir has lost everything and they have been driven to the forest, Markandeya comes and commiserates with the Pandavas, and Yudhishthir asks, isn't it a great tragedy? A noble woman like Draupadi had to undergo all this humiliation. Is there any parallel example in world's history? And at that time he says, there is an example, Savitri is that example, that's what he says. And the original story is narrated in 600 lines, 600 crisp lines. And again, out of the 600, if you read the original story, about 310 lines are used up to celebrate Satyavan's return from the kingdom of death. So the actual story is only in 310 to 320 lines, whereas Sri Aurobindo uses for it 24,000 lines. So in one sense, it is an 80-fold enlargement, 80 or 800, so you know mathematics more than I do. From 300 to 24,000, how many? 80. So 80-fold enlargement. What is it that he is doing? Why does he need this vast canvas? That's what I will try to deal with today. As you know, the original story is that there is a king, Savitri's father, Ashwapati is his name. As you know, in Sanskrit, words have meanings, weight. Ashwapati, Ashwa is horse, Pati is the lord of the horse. Now it's interesting that when the Western scholars first started looking at the Indian tradition, they were totally confused about it. Kipling said East was being East and West was West, and they can hardly come together. I don't think it was entirely wrong. It does require an effort on the part of Indians to really understand the West. And it does require an effort from the Westerners to really understand the East, because culturally they were cast in two different molds. And so when Max Muller and their dedication to Sanskrit, their dedication to an alien culture is very praiseworthy. Hats off to that dedication. But they didn't have the secret of the Indian spiritual tradition, and very often their translations are literal translations, and the significance of the entire tradition is lost. And many of these missionaries, their ultimate purpose was, how stupid are these Hindus? They have written the Vedas and the Upanishads. No, they know very little about these things. This was the purpose, but as I always keep telling my friends, God very often works through our ignorance. And so although their purpose was different, their purpose was trying to show how inferior the entire civilization was, yet they have rendered tremendous service to the coming of two cultures together. This is what has happened. Anyway, in the Mahabharata, Ashwapati is this king, Lord of Life is Ashwapati. And what does Lord of Life mean? One who has mastered life, one who is in control of life. Now, Ashwapati is depicted as a very noble, virtuous king who has all the benefits of life. He has a large kingdom, an efficient army, he has everything. But life is always about a but. If you take anybody's life, you say this is excellent, but there is this but. So his life also had a but. What is that but? He didn't have progeny. He didn't have children. So the story goes that he performed a yajna which took 18 years. Every day he was offering thousands of oblations in the fire, and this yajna went on for 18 years. This is the story, original story. Now, Ashwapati's yajna, which goes on for 18 years, Vyasa describes it in 10 lines, 10 lines. Now, when you take up Sri Aurobindo's epic, and want to see the equivalent of this Ashwapati's yajna, you have nearly 350 pages. Now, 350 pages, about 12,000 lines. So how does Sri Aurobindo, how does he expand 10 lines into 12,000 lines? What is it happening? This is the first question to ask. Now this is the first difference between Vyasa's treatment of the legend and Sri Aurobindo's treatment. Then you realize this Ashwapati, who is doing yajna, this yajna is transformed by Sri Aurobindo into yoga. So Ashwapati's yajna in the Vyasa story becomes Ashwapati's yoga in Sri Aurobindo's epic. And here, if you want to understand who Sri Aurobindo was, what he was trying to do, why he spent 40 years in Pondicherry after attaining some of the highest realizations of traditional yoga, he was in Pondicherry for 40 years. What is it he was trying to do? His autobiography is found in the first 3 books of Savitri. They are the most difficult part of this. And this yoga, which is described in 3 books, there are 3 yogas described in Savitri. One is Sri Aurobindo's own yoga, one is the mother's yoga, which is Savitri's yoga. The third, you and I also figure in Savitri, and there is also our yoga in it. So there are 3 yogas. There is Sri Aurobindo's yoga, Sri Savitri's yoga, and your and my yoga. Because Satyavan is basically the aspiration for truth which is hidden in our hearts. That is what makes every young man idealistic. He wants to conquer the world. He wants to do good to the world. He writes poetry about when he is 18 and 19 and 20. But unfortunately, by the time he is 45, he has become a confirmed cynic. Most people are flaming idealists in their teenagers up to 20, 25. But by the time they turn 45, they have become cynics. That is, this Satyavan in us dies. Just as in the story Satyavan dies, the Satyavan in the heart of each one of us dies. And this Satyavan has to be revived. And that is the story. So the theater of our heart is where Satyavan lives and Satyavan dies. Satyavan dies very young. So there is that aspect of also. But I won't talk about Savitri's yoga today or a yoga of you and me, but I will talk about Ashwapati's yoga. Now this Ashwapati's yoga is divided into 3 parts. If you have the book, you will see that Sri Aurobindo devotes 22 cantos. 22 cantos to Ashwapati's yoga. Book 1 has 5 cantos in all. And the way Sri Aurobindo narrates the story, he observes what are called the Greek unities. Unity of place, unity of time, and unity of action. Now the entire story take place, the time span it requires is less than 24 hours. His narration begins with the description of the dawn of the day on which Satyavan was destined to die. There is a certain day, and the first canto begins with a description of the dawn of that day. And at the end of nearly 800 pages, nearly 24,000 lines of poetry, the last canto begins with a description of the dawn of the following day. So in other words, this entire action is described as taking place in one day. Right? Now we said Ashwapati's yoga went on for 18 years. How does it happen in one day? He uses techniques like the flashback and so on. You must understand these things. They are accessible to a poet. So as we begin, the first canto describes the dawn of the day on which Satyavan was to die. It's a beautiful description of the dawn. It is also one of the most difficult parts of Savitri. If you survive the 5 pages of the book 1 of Savitri, that you have made it. Because it's a very, very difficult part, and it's representative of Sri Aurobindo's technique of writing poetry. he is describing a dawn. It's what makes it difficult. He is not describing one dawn. He is describing 7 different dawns, dawns at various levels. There is a physical dawn, there is a psychological dawn, there is a dawn of consciousness. There are various dawns are suggested in the description of one dawn, so that makes it difficult, but it's a very significant introduction. He says the goddess Usha comes up in the sky, all ready to bestow the grace abounding that she has on mankind, on humanity. And she's about to drop all this, suddenly finds man is not yet ready. Man is not yet ready to receive the highest bounty of God, and so Usha retreats. That is how the beginning, the description of the dawn goes. And this is a persistent theme of Savitri. That is, God knocks at the door of humanity persistently, but man is too busy elsewhere. Man simply doesn't want to open the door for the divine to come in. Once he has gone in, say, oh, sorry, we should have opened the door. Next time God comes again, do the same thing. So one of the persistent themes in Savitri is the rejection of grace by man. When God wants to come in, as you can see, we have been rejecting grace. Ramakrishna Paramhans was in his body. Raman Maharshi was in his body. Both of them brought the highest light from the heavens. What use did we make of it? They must have, some 100 people, 200 people, 1,000 people, 2,000 people must have been saved. Sri Aurobindo himself was in Pondicherry. Mother was in Pondicherry. How many people benefited directly from their presence? So the question comes, even if God were to come before us and said, look, I want to give you the highest. What is your highest? We will give to God a small agenda. Please make sure that my son, who is finding it difficult to get into this school or that admission, make it smooth. Make this adjustment, that adjustment. This is my agenda, and that's about all that we want. God wants to tell us, He wants to reveal to us that we are all children of immortality. What the Upanishads call Amrutasya Putraha. We are all children of immortality, and it's a shame that you and I, with a long shopping list and a wad of notes in our pocket, we go on a shopping spree. I want to buy things. Hyderabad markets I have exhausted. Then I want to go to Singapore. Singapore markets I don't find anything more interesting. I come to London and go to New York and go on adding things as if we are all people who want to buy happiness. God wants to say, you fool, your very nature is happiness. Why don't you realize that? God wants us to realize that our nature is happiness, our nature is immortality, our nature is perfection. But we are not willing to do that. And so all these great avatars, all these great rishis who come, their words have fallen on deaf ears. Christ came, taught of love. What happened? A few people must have understood it. The rest of Christianity became as good or as bad as any other institutionalized religion. You fought jihads, you fought wars. The same thing about Hinduism. We had the highest of wisdom. What did we do? We tolerated a kind of social system where 1/3 of the people were regarded as untouchables. Half the population, the way we have treated women for down the century, not one Mahant, not one Mahatma said this is wrong, the way you are treating women is wrong. Nobody said that. And we all quote it from our scriptures and say ours is a very great religion. A young girl was married off at the age of 8. She became widowed at the age of 11. Then what do you say? Oh, it is all a past karma. There is nothing we can do about it. See, we had the greatest of spiritual teachings. What did we do with it? There are stories of misers in our each state, each language has its own folklore. We have a story of a miser whose children would go around without shoes and torn clothes. In rainy season they wouldn't even have an umbrella, and people thought this man must be very, very poor. But what he used to do is, whatever money he made, he used to dig up little holes in his drawing room put these golden bars or gold coins in that and fill it up and sleep soundly on the surface saying, I am very rich. But if you have riches, the riches have to be used to enrich your life. What good is philosophy, what good is Vedas, what good is Upanishads if we can't feed our own people? One of the reasons why I turned to this quest is as a student I went to UCLA a long time ago. And as soon as I went there, is a culture shock. From India you go to America. This is not now, in the 60s. And I was already myself a professor in some place. And there I suddenly became a student. And my teachers were even younger than me. So there was quite a bit, I was shaken up. And I had to adjust myself. And one day I suddenly found Chinmayanji was coming. Chinmayanji, who became so famous later on. That was his first visit to America. And he was addressing a meeting. It's a crowded hall. Americans, Indians, everybody came there. And he spoke for about an hour and 15 minutes. I was thrilled. I said, at least there is something we can teach the world. Because I was, very psychologically very demoralized by the fact that after being a teacher for several years in India, I was becoming a student, and all my teachers were even younger than me. My PhD guide was even younger to me. All this, and here he says there is some Indian standing up and giving a talk. I was very thrilled, and that day when I went home, I was not walking on the earth. I was, at least 6 inches flying. I went home, dinner time. You switch on the TV. In those days, NBC, CBS, switch on the TV. And the TV commentator says, poor countries like Biafra and India. I said, we have become a paradigm example before the whole world for poverty. This great civilization, as I said, Columbus and his people wanted to come to India because we are very rich. If you even read the stories the travelers have written about the Vijayanagara Empire, and diamonds and gold, these were sold on the pavements as you sold potatoes and cabbages these days. And from there, where have we come? And what does it mean? Chinmayanji comes to America and lectures there. Shouldn't he be lecturing in India? This is where we need spiritual wisdom is needed there. What's the point? These people have already made it good in their own way. One day they will realize this is not good enough and they on their own will come to us. But what is it? In those days, remember, America had to spend every day 1 shipload of food grains to India. Those were the days. I said, what is happening to all this spiritual wealth of ours? If we can't feed our own people, if we can't educate our own children, what is the use of all this? And this led me to the study of Sri Aurobindo and said he gave me an insight into what went wrong in the way we lived our lives, in the way we lost touch with the essential strength of our tradition. We lost our vitality, we lost the joy of life. If you go to a Madurai temple and look at just the walls outside, you will see here were a people who had abundant joy, had abundant vital energy, were so creative. India has today become a paradigm example of listlessness. The buses don't come 11 o'clock, bus comes at 12 o'clock. We just blame our past, our karma, and just sit there. Nothing is being done. So the entire psyche of India has completely been crushed. And from such beaten psyche, nothing great, nothing creative will ever come. This is because over India came a shadow of the negation of life. And all our saints said, life is an illusion, life is a mithya, life is not worth living. If life is the mithya, life is not worth living, life is no reality, why did the so-called God even create this world and sent us here? We must have been his enemies, so he sent us here. As they, he sent people to Andaman or Kalapani and so on, so he must have sent us here. There must be some purpose to this life. This is what we lost. And so, this is what Sri Aurobindo also emphasizes, that our culture was a culture which affirmed life. And even then, as you know, we had such great ambitions that even today people think, is it ever possible? This must be, totally undreamt of. That Sri Aurobindo says it is possible for man to become physically immortal. You may say this is too far-fetched, this is not going to happen in our lifetime, but just imagine the aspiration of a man who thinks there is no end to which man can reach. Man's aspiration can conquer the whole world. This is what is at the basis, at the spiritual tradition. And one of the things we must realize is all the life negating things that Hinduism associated with. As a result, I know our friend Ramakrishna also knows, he comes from Delhi ashram. Whenever there is a talk, spiritual talk by so and so, young people will go and tell their grandfather, there is a spiritual talk, you must go to that spiritual talk. So spiritual talks are only good when you have lost your teeth and your hair has either disappeared or become completely bald. And even suppose they are good for you, you have already reached a stage you can do very little with that wisdom. If spirituality is needed, it is needed for young people to give them the energy and the courage to take life in both their hands and mold it according to their dreams. Spirituality has to do this job. And this is not happening anywhere. If you entice people, you must give funny titles to your talks, and therefore young people will come out of curiosity. So the entire trend of spirituality in India has been on these lines: life negation and not life assertion, rejection of life, not building life. What can you do, sir? Life is all so bad, life is all so corrupt. If life is all very fine, why are you needed here? You are not needed here. You are needed here because there are difficult problems, and you are needed here to grapple these problems. This is a duel in which God has invited you to be his partner in constructing this life. And if you are a real sportsman, and if you are a Bengali, in India only Bengalis are fond of football. And what is the ideal weather condition for football? Should be drizzling sometimes. The ground must be slippery. There you play football. You fall down, you bruise your arms. That's the joy of playing football. And we saw India, sir, is so very difficult. There is corruption here, there is the garbage there is this problem there, that other problem there. That is why you are needed. That is why your faith in God is to be tested in these conditions. This is where you have to build the world. So this is the kind of message. When I go to India, I don't normally talk about spiritual matters. I say this is what Sri Aurobindo is saying, that we have a tradition of life assertion, of building life, of making it beautiful, of making it perfect. Where are we now? You are like an agricultural expert who has written great books on agriculture, but people come and look at your farms and you find you don't even have a normal harvest. We are like that. Oh, you have great spiritual wisdom. Let me look at your schools. Let me look at your institutions. Let me look at your life. So impoverished. So what is the use of all this spirituality? This is the question every young Indian asks. Of course, later on as he grows up, he realizes that things are not so simple, and things are, a little more complicated, and it's not as if in the West life is very well organized, life is comfortable. It's not as if West has no problems and everything is good here. They miss one very important factor in life, and that is the spirit and its dimensions and what it can do to build you and so on. So these are the two things that keep happening. Now I was talking about Ashwapati and Ashwapati's yoga. Now Ashwapati's yoga, as I said, is in three parts. The first part talks about Ashwapati's own individual psycho-spiritual transformation. That Sri Aurobindo describes in 3 cantos. Now first of all, what is spirituality? What do we understand by spirituality? Because there are many different ways of understanding spirituality. For some people, spirituality is reciting Hanuman Chalisa. For some people, spirituality is doing pujas. I had an interesting experience last November. I was in Australia. In Australia, unlike you people here, Many of them are first generation people who have gone to Australia. They miss India very much, and they all want temples. Everybody has to have a temple. So there is a big temple in which there is a hall. And India has several denominations. Some people are mother worshippers, Shakti worshippers, Krishna worshippers, Rama, Hanuman, Shanmugam, all kinds of things. So I was taken to this hall, and I was amazed to see all gods jostling with each other, finding little space for existence there. All these things are there, and all gods, goddesses. Somebody was, reading Gita in one corner, somebody was doing Hanuman Chalis in another corner, somebody was doing something else. So we somehow feel doing these things, like we do annual Shraddha, we don't know nothing about our father, but this is supposed to be a good thing. So if we can't do it, we pay the priests, we take 101 rupees and do this Shraddha, so my father's ancestor spirit will lie in peace. So we also want to do spirituality. What is it? Go to a temple, do all these things. That is not spirituality. What is spirituality? Spirituality, is it holding your nose and breathing from the next nostril coming? That's all good for your health, but that is not necessarily spirituality. What is spirituality? There is a great deal of confusion about what is spiritual. Now, since I have spoken in my own prose for so long, I would like you to read a few lines from Savitri, where Sri Aurobindo talks about it very succinctly. And if you have a book at home, you should make a note of these lines and go home and read them. This is on page 23, if you have a book, access to Savitri. This is at the beginning of Ashwapati's yoga. Ashwapati is now trying for psycho-spiritual transformation. Yoga is basically something to do with your consciousness. And it's I never get tired of saying this. You see, we have different dress codes for different things. If you want to go to a club, you are in shorts and t-shirt. If you want to go to a party, you have a jubba and bunny, pajama and so on. If you want to go to office, you have your suit. If you want to get jogging, you have jogging dress. But unfortunately, we have only one consciousness. So the consciousness you take with you to the puja room, where you sit for meditation. You have spent half an hour, 45 minutes doing meditation, cleansing it, making it pure and so on. The meditation is finished, you go to office, you can't change your consciousness and wear an office consciousness. The same consciousness with which you are meditating is the consciousness you are taking to your office. And there, if you cheat your superior, if you cheat your subordinate, we think this is a non-spiritual part of life. God has nothing to do with it. See, this is how in India we have come to this state. There are people who go on Ayyappa's pilgrimage. Ayyappa going annual pilgrimage is a very big thing, and it requires a whole lot of preparation. 1 whole month you have to lead a strict life of a particular kind. So one day I go to my office, the telephone office. I had just moved house. Telephone had not been moved. I had waited for 2 months. So I went to, somebody said, that's the desk you have to go to. I go to that desk. So 11:15, the chap is missing. So I ask his neighbor, is he on leave? No sir, he is not on leave. Where is he then? Just gone for a cup of tea. I thought, cup of tea, 5 minutes, I'll wait. 20 minutes pass, he is not there. He said he went for a cup of tea. Yes sir, he is doing this Ayyappa Vratam. And when you are doing this Ayyappa Vratam, you can't take tea from an ordinary canteen. You have to take tea prepared by another person who is also doing this Ayyappa Vratam. And the nearest tea shop for that is 1.5 kilometers from here. So he has gone there for drinking tea. Now I am absolutely sure Ayyappa would not approve of this. That this chap comes to office and remains absent during office hours for 45-50 minutes for a cup of tea. This is the ridiculous thing to which we have reduced religion in India. And this is for which we are paying a price, a very, very heavy price. Now, these are all negative things. But what is spirituality? Indian government is totally confused about what spirituality is, what morality is, what religion is. So that also is very confused, and then we have this whole business of secularism, non-secularism, the total confusion. But our tradition is very clear on what spirituality is. And you'll see in these few lines how Sri Aurobindo describes it. This bodily appearance is not all. This bodily appearance is not all. The form deceives, the person is a mask. The first thing spirituality teaches you is do not identify yourself with the body. This body that you have is your present address. My present address is 226, which street is it? Whitten Avenue East. Now, as long as I live here, I can use this house, but I have to keep it clean, I have to look after it the best I can. But I must tell myself this is a house I can live for 15 days, a month at the most, then I move on. So this address that I have collected is a temporary address. This body is a vehicle, but this body is not me. This is an equipment given to me, this is an instrument given to me. So he says, this bodily appearance is not all. He doesn't say that you are equal to your body. What about my personality? I have very great effort. I have acquired something called personality. That also says, no matter what happens, do not give up your individuality. In real spirituality, you are not required to give up your individuality. What you are required to give up is your surface personality, your superficial personality, your ego-defined personality, which is as much a contribution of the society, contribution of culture. Take, for example, me. I was born in a certain age. I was born in a village. I was born in Karnataka. I was born a Brahmin. Now, if I analyze my reaction to any problem, any situation, honestly, if I look at it, I can see the contribution made by my birth, contribution made by my early upbringing, contribution that is made by the fact that I was born in India, the contribution that is made by the fact that I was born in a Brahmin family. Now, these are not me. There is an essential me behind all these things. So, the personality, the surface personality we all have. Now, I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to be a poet. How did I get into this idea? Because I went to a school where my professors, my teachers filled this idea into my head. It's not mine. So I was formed that way. The circumstances are such that we are molded that way. So what we call our personality, of which you are so proud, in fact is the most surface part of you. Now when this drops, the real personality will come out. And the real personality, see, we are all really meant to manifest one aspect of the perfection of the divine. So in other words, there is nobody in the world who is in competition with me, because God doesn't create two of a kind. Each person is unique, each person has a destiny. Then why is it that we come into clash? We come into clash because we have not yet become our real selves. We come into clash because we are operating on the basis of our ego personality. So that's why he says, the form deceives, the person is a mask. Hid deep in man, celestial powers can dwell. And in 2 lines beautifully he says, he is fragile ship. This is a fragile ship. The body is a fragile ship. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years an incognito of the imperishable. There is an imperishable, a spark of the imperishable, a representative of the imperishable, which that lives in me, but how does he live? Incognito. As the Pandavas lived in the Virata's kingdom, you know the stories, each person, Bhima worked as a cook, and Arjuna worked as a dance teacher. They all lived there incognito. So God had to live in each one of us incognito. So this body is meant to be a ship. What kind of a ship? Fragile ship, which conveys, which transports through the sea of years, through the sea of time. What does it convey? What does it transport? A representative of the divine. The representative of the divine lives in each one of us. And this representative of the divine, because he is incognito, he is living as it were in hiding, our life resembles the life of a princely state, where the prince is still 5 years old, and therefore all the functionaries of the kingdom do what they like for their benefit, not for the benefit of the real owner, because the real owner is only 5 years old. He is not mature enough to assert himself. So the driver drives the car as he pleases. The cook cooks in the kitchen food that he likes, and not what the prince or other people are likely to say that we want it. The accountant keeps account as he likes. So our entire life is being misappropriated. Why is it misappropriated? The owner of our life has not yet asserted himself. So the whole purpose of spiritual life, spiritual sadhana, is to bring this incognito, this representative of God who lives in us, to the forefront, and giving him the entire control of our life, and say, this, you control this. The body, the mind, life energies, these are all instruments. Instruments belonging to whom? Belonging to this representative of God that lives in us. And so, the primary fundamental principle of spirituality is to say, I am basically a spirit. What does a spirit mean? I am basically a representative. I carry within me a replica of the divine. And this replica of the divine is in hiding because it has come into ignorance, and therefore we have our sadhana entirely consists of bringing this replica to the front, making all these resources of my life as surrendering it to the divine within us, and say, now you live, you lead us, you tell us what you want to do with my life. That's why in the Gita, when Arjun is baffled by the fact that he has to kill his own teachers, his own cousins, his own people with whom he lived all these years, he says, I don't want to fight this war. I want to go away. The Lord finally says, I will handle all these things. Nimitta matram bhava savyasachi. You become my instrument. Now, we are all instruments. Whose instruments are we? We are all instruments of the ego. And therefore, my ego and your ego come and clash. Instead of the ego being the leader of my life, if the divine in me becomes the leader in my life, you and I will immediately find we have complementary roles. We are supposed to live a life of harmony and not of clash. And so, this is primarily spirituality, bringing the spirit within us forward. Now, whatever helps you in this is good spiritual practice. Whatever hinders this practice, hinders this progress of the inner being, is bad spiritual practice. If by doing great deal of pranayam, you can only puff off your ego and say, look, Dhirubhai can do only 1 hour's pranayam, I can do 2 hours pranayam, so I am superior to Dhirubhai. This is the most unspiritual act you are doing. If by giving these talks, I pretend to myself, say, look, I am going and spreading God's message everywhere, I went to London, I went to Australia, and if I have this, it will take me 3 times, 3 lives to undo the harm I am accumulating on myself by giving these talks. So whatever helps the inner being to come to the front. And what kinds of things help? Love, compassion, giving, This helps. Taking, grabbing, hating, each one of these things hardens the screen between your surface and the inner being. Vinoba used to say the central message of the Gita is read it in the reverse. Gita, if you read it in the reverse, it becomes Tagi, Tyaga. Giving. More and more you give, the more and more you become transparent. The inner being becomes transparent to you. This is spiritual life. So people say, why is it that Sri Aurobindo doesn't say, all other people say you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, have a cold bath. Now I don't think cold bath and God have anything to do with one another. And then you say, you take a wooden little thing and sit on it with your face to the east. Why not? Did not God create the west also? Why east? Then you say you read 18 verses from the Gita. Why not 25? 25 is a better number than 18. So all these rituals, see, I am not against rituals. Ritual is what I have to evolve to suit my temperament, my needs. And what helps me, I must be aware of the fact that it may not help the next man. So he is free to choose his procedures, his way. And if you therefore you ask Sri Aurobindo, what is the great secret of sadhana? You will say the great secret of sadhana can be summarized in 3 words. What are the 3 words? Aspiration, rejection, surrender. Oh, surrender! Surrender is very easy. We all can begin with surrender. Is it very easy? Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam raja. And we must remind our audience, this particular verse comes in chapter 18 of the Gita. And it is almost the last verse of it, 66 or something, and the verses are about 70. So, real surrender is the fruit of a lifelong sadhana. It is not beginning. So, aspiration, rejection, surrender may be very simple words, but the advantage of this is that in the modern age, when each individual is realizing the importance of freedom, this rigid ritualism is against the spirit of the time. So we must have ritualism, in the sense a procedure, a program, but this we must evolve on our own as it suits our needs. And what is the purpose of this, all this, following this? Bringing the hidden incognito of the divine to the front so that he takes over the charge of this life. So that's why he says, I'll read that again. This bodily appearance is not all. The form deceives, the person is a mask. Hid deep in man, celestial powers can dwell. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years an incognito of the imperishable, a spirit that's a flame of God abides. There abides in each one of us a spirit. And what is this spirit? A spark from the flame of God. Just imagine God being a huge conflagration, a huge fire, from which sparks are flying off. And each one of us has within us this spark. Get in touch with this spark, your life is transformed in no time at all. This is the secret of spirituality. Anything that helps you to bring this spirit, this spark of the divine to the front, is spiritual, and everything else may be helpful, but that is not essentially spiritual. I don't care how many Vedas you have mastered, how many Upanishads you have mastered. You may be a big scholar, I will have great respect for you, but you have not done the essential thing for spirituality, which is getting in touch with the Spirit. The Spirit constantly sends us signals. But our voice, our ears are so deafened by other noises all the time, the Spirit ultimately, out of frustration, just gives up. I can't do anything with this chap, because he doesn't even hear. Because there is so much noise all around us, and that's why in spirituality, peace, silence, These things are very, very essential. Peace, silence, equanimity. What is the great spiritual realizations? Oh, that man sees visions. That man has wonderful dreams. If you want to see visions and dreams, you can as well switch on a video and see the dreams and visions. Spirituality is not about visions and dreams. Spirituality is about the inner vibration of your consciousness. The consciousness feels pure, the consciousness feels undisturbed, the consciousness feels a peace. To that extent it is closer. The consciousness feels equanimity. Nothing disturbs you. Why does nothing disturb you? Nothing disturbs you because you know ultimately everything is the hands of the Lord. And the Lord doesn't take an afternoon siesta. Sometimes we think, like our Indian ministers, when their affairs get too difficult, they find a reason to go to the United States so that secretary will solve the problem by the time they come back. We have a similar idea with God. God must be a kind of absentee landlord. He sits somewhere in some other heaven and then he, things happen. There's something interesting. A Hindu God has the most difficult task. Because in all other religions, God creates the world. And God creating the world is like a potter creating a pot. A potter creates a pot. How does a potter create a pot? He collects some earth and then puts it on this wheel and a pot is created. When you break the pot, of course the potter is unhappy that his 2 pounds or 3 pounds or 5 pounds are lost, but he doesn't sustain any injury, right? But an Indian God is not like that. The Indian God doesn't create the world as a potter creates a pot. The Indian God becomes the world. So where is the God? All the stupid things you and I do are the God doing it. It's a God in this world. Srishti in the Indian concept is God becomes the world. God has become the world. So God is not somewhere out there. This is God growing. So our responsibility therefore is to this God that is growing within us. And that is the purpose of life. Shakespeare somewhere says, ripeness is all. Ultimately, what is the purpose of life? Purpose of life is this growth, so that the inner presence comes more to the front. That is the whole purpose of this. And therefore, well, sometimes when I talk about these things, I wonder whether I should go along these lines or tell a little story, so that sometimes the stories are bring out the truth much more clearly than philosophies. There is a story about an Indian, how difficult it is to be a Hindu God. If I were given a chance, I would rather be a Christian God or a Muslim God and not a Hindu God. The reason? The reason is this, that nothing exists in this world but God. Now then you have to say, Hitler did all those stupid things for so long. How could he have done it if he didn't have sanction from God? Because nothing in this world exists without God. So that is the problem. In other religions you can say, look, he represents Satan, so it's ultimately Satan's work. My God is safe. Now there is a story, very well known. I don't know whether you heard this, but I think it seems there was a king too puffed up with his own importance, and so very egotistic. One day he decides to call all the Pandits of his court, all the Brahmins. He calls them and says, look, you are very well read, you have devoted a lifetime to scholarship. I want to ask you a question. What is the question? Tell me, who is the greater, me or God? Who is greater? God is greater or I am greater than God? The answer is clear, God is great, but this king, being what he is, he may simply take these fellows and behead them because they think God is greater than me. They could have said, you are greater than God. But I don't know about Brahmins today, but in those days Brahmins had certain regard for truth. So they don't want to tell a lie either. So what do? So they use their discretion. So the reader says, "Sir, you are such a mighty king, and the questions you ask, how can we hope to give answers immediately? The question is so profound, we will have to consider it and give us a week's time. Next week we come, we will give you the answer." The king says, "All right, you are given a week's time." They all go home, think about it, finally decide the best answer is Palayanam. Let us leave, let us leave the kingdom of this chap and migrate to some other place, because this chap being mad, if we tell him the truth, he will get angry. We can't tell the falsehood, what do we do? So the last day, they all get up at 3 o'clock, put all their bags and baggages in their bullock carts. The bullock carts are all ready, and they want to migrate to the neighboring kingdom. Around 3:30, Grandpa, who is still in bed, wakes up and says, "What is it? There is so much commotion. You fellows hardly ever get up before 8 o'clock today, or up at 3:30. What is it?" "Grandpa, don't ask us a question. This is a calamity. This is the life of the future of this entire community. Just come along." He says, "Please tell me. At least I have lived longer than any one of you, so I have some experience. What is the problem?" They said, "This is the problem." "Is that all? You all go back to sleep. I will handle this problem," he says. Okay. So next morning, this elderly man with a stick in his hand leads the entire Brahmin community. They all go to the king. And the king, sitting in his throne, is very happy with himself. He says, "Have you found the answer to my question?" "Yes, sir." "What is the answer?" They say, "My lord, undoubtedly you are greater than God." "What?" "Yes. It's not enough to say this, you have to prove this. You have to give the reason." "Yes, sir, we have a very good reason." "What is the reason?" "The reason is, if you ever get displeased with us, you can banish us out of your kingdom. But God ever gets displeased with us, He cannot banish us out of His kingdom. There is no place outside God's kingdom. So this is the Hindu God. If anything evil, bad happens, you can't say, "Look, Satan did it, I was not responsible for it." You know, some African tribes have this faith that God is essentially good, but he has a wicked cousin. So God wants to do good, the cousin comes and spoils it. Because he is his cousin, he can't punish him either. So God does the repair job. By the time it is repaired, once again he comes and does things. We have no such excuse. We have to say that everything here is a manifestation of the Lord. And the Gita is very clear in it. The Pandit, the pig, the dog, the beautiful lady, these are all manifestations of the divine. You can't exclude anybody out of it. And so this is the world that we are seized with. And in this world we have to live. In this world we have to find a purpose. The great question everybody asks is, if God is all so great, how come He created such a hopeless world? I very often keep saying it in my public talks. We very often think, if only God had consulted me, I would have given Him some tips. Please do this way, do that way, this is bad, this is bad. And it's very interesting, Sri Aurobindo once writes in a letter, when God was about to create the world, He did think of you. He wanted to ask your advice. But you were not around, so He couldn't ask you anything. So the question still arises, and this is a very difficult question. If God is all perfection, if God is all bliss, God is all ananda, why is it that this world that we have around us is just the opposite of any of these things? What is happening here? Now, there are three possible answers to this question. One answer is to say, like a lawyer in a court, "Sir, what is the question?" The question is, how did a perfect God come to create this imperfect world? One answer is, sir, I don't accept that anybody created this world. This world is what it is as a result of chain of accidents. Nobody planned it, nobody created it, it's just a series of accidents. That is what scientists used to believe until recently. This is nothing, there is no creator. The Big Bang took place, don't ask how it took place. Once it took place, everything else you can work out in probability, and finally we are here. So the question need not be even answered because the question is not valid, because the question presupposes somebody created the world. I don't believe this world was created. This just world happened as a series of blind accidents. That's one answer. The other answer is the famous answer given by Indian philosophers. That answer also says, I don't accept the question. Why? Because there is no imperfect world. There is God, all right. God is perfect, all right, but I don't accept there is an imperfect world. Why? What you call the imperfect world is Maya. It's illusion. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. This is all a Maya, so there is nothing to be answered. The first answer is given by atheists. There is no God, and therefore you don't have to answer the question, how did a perfect God create an imperfect world? The second answer is the answer given by what are called the Mayavadins, who say this imperfect world that you complain about is Maya. It doesn't really exist. What exists is Brahman alone. But Sri Aurobindo sticks his neck out and says, yes, there is a perfect God and there is an imperfect world. And there is a reason why he chose to create this imperfect world. You want to find out? Yes. Then he would say, read the Life Divine, where he has tried to answer this basic question. How come a perfect God come to create this imperfect world? This is his understanding of how the world came about, how the world started in imperfection. And his brief answer is, this world as you see is not static. It's a slowly, gradually evolving world. There was a time, as scientists themselves have said, when there was not even a blade of grass on this earth. There was no life form of any kind on this earth. This might have taken place millions and billions of years ago, billion years ago. Then suddenly came the greening of the earth. Plants, bushy bushes, creepers, grass, vegetable world, life world. What is interesting is, when life came, two other things also came with it. What are the two things that came with it? Death and pain. When there was no life, there was neither death nor pain. When life came, death and pain came with it. All these things are so beautifully explained here. I am preparing a background so that I can go to these parts in my later talks and talk about it. Then slowly came various life forms, insects, birds, creatures like crocodiles, elephants. Gradually, slowly, after many millions of years later, came man. With man came the mind. With the mind, imperceptibly came something else, which we don't like, is the sense of evil. A tiger kills a lamb, and there is no council which says tiger must be condemned because it has perpetrated an evil act. There is no notion of evil there. We came with the mind, and with the mind comes good and evil. So if you look at the world is not a static world. It's not like this. And therefore, There is no reason to believe this world will be like this forever. The only point we must realize is that you and I do not have God's perspective. If there is a God, and if what the scientists say is true, which is the world has been around, the creation has been around for 15 billion years, and the world is going to be around at least for 10 billion years, which one of us can encompass in their imagination a time span of 25 billion years? Suppose I tell you, you want to know what exactly will be happening in this room 250 years from now? You'll say, I'm not interested. Who is going to live for 250 years? Tell me what is going to happen in my lifetime. So very often people complain, oh, the Sri Aurobindo and the mother said the supramental has descended, but I don't see anywhere. Because the idea is, if the supramental has descended, I must get a piece of the action in my lifetime. There was some time they announced Auroville is going to be set up. Big international township. And there is going to be so many 4 different wings. Cultural wing, industrial wing, residential wing, this, that and the other. And so my colleague said, what a wonderful place for retirement. So everybody wanted 200, how much money can I get out of my provident fund? All right, it's enough to buy 200 square yards. Yeah. So we'll all buy 200 square yards and build up houses there. But Auroville was meant to be a great fire, in which you had to pour your consciousness so that it is hammered into shape. And once people found that, there was a palayanam. Everybody ran away from Auroville. And what is very interesting is the much maligned West. Westerners invested their life energies and built Auroville to what it is today. When a real challenge comes, you can depend on Indians to run as fast as they can. This is this is what has happened to this country. And I always tell my Indian friends, look, Sri Aurobindo is not talking about this palayanam. I very often give them this example. Imagine a test match between India and Pakistan. You know this story. India falls short of 5 runs. If it scores these 5 runs, it will win the test. Last over is being bowled. India had 2 wickets in hand, and within 6 balls they have to score 5 runs. And the chances are 85% of the cases they will not make these 5 runs. Why? Because we say we believe in God. We don't believe in the God's world. If we really believed in God's world, we'll fight in this world. We want to run away from... If the running away is why God wants us to do, why did He create this world? So again and again the whole thing in Savitri, again the whole thing comes. This world, as you see here, is imperfect. But this world is not made imperfect so as to discourage you from engaging yourself in the world. You are here invited to participate in this world, to perfect this world. And Savitri is about questions like this. Later on you will see, why was the world created? Why was the world created the way it is created? What is the meaning of evolution? Scientists will tell you everything about evolution, step by step. The one thing they won't tell you is why of it all. Why should we live? You see, the great cry from the Western world is the cry for significance. Is there any significance to life? We have yachts, we have pleasure houses, we have cars, we have roads, we have insurance, we have jobs, we have everything. But can please anyone tell us why we have to live? And all the scientists and psychiatrists say, please don't ask us this question. This is the one thing we can't answer. But man in the ancient world was very happy. Although the ancient world depended on superstition. They believed earth was at the center of the universe. The earth was stable. The sun went round the world. And God had no other business but to think of you and me. God's constant preoccupation was to think of you and me. Gradually, one by one, earth was relegated to a secondary place. The sun was primary. Earth goes round the sun. And earth is a small speck of dust. Then comes Newton, and he says this is a clockwork universe, everything is wound up, and you don't need, God is not needed. Then comes Freud. He says you have no freedom. All your hidden samskaras, guide your life. Then comes Marx, and he says there is ineluctable economic laws, you can't do anything about it. And finally you feel you are no more than a two-legged worm crawling on a speck of dust in this infinite space. What is the meaning of life? In 1968, when this student revolution in France was taking place, or existentialism came, the whole thing was a cry for significance. Please, I want to understand why should we live? And there was a legend on an underground train, there is no truth. There is no truth about this world to be found out. And everything is permissible. There is no morality, you don't have to follow. Suit yourself, do what you want to do. There is no truth. Now this is the conclusion to which all modern knowledge is driving man. And man being man is not happy with this. And all the cry, the anguish that you find in Western literature is the anguish for significance. What is the significance of life? Does it matter how I live my life? Or am I just, as I said, a two-legged worm crawling on this speck of dust called the earth in the infinity of space? Sri Aurobindo, in my judgment, has undone the harm that all this thinking has done to the human psyche and restored significance to human life. And without denying anything that the modern science has said, wants to convince us your life is important, your life is significant. How you live your life is significant. No matter whether you are Prince Charles or you are a lowly menial somewhere working in Calcutta, it doesn't really matter. Your life has significance. So this, as you will see, is a book that vibrates with hope and love. Everywhere, every few pages, as I go along, I will read these passages to you. When the Western world was being inundated with vibrations of gloom and depression, Sri Aurobindo was counteracting this by writing Savitri. And he has done this. It may not be accessible to a large number of people right now for various reasons, but the work that Sri Aurobindo did by writing Savitri is a work of great significance for man's future. And it is this, the whole, it's very significant. We are running out of time. I will just finish this point. During the First World War, when the First World War was being waged, Sri Aurobindo counteracted it by writing the Life Divine. When the Second World War was being waged, he counteracted it by revising the Life Divine. And President Wilson's daughter, the American President Wilson's daughter, was in Pondicherry. And when the Second World War was declared, they sent a ship to fetch her back from Pondicherry because they said Pondicherry was not safe. And Margaret Wilson said to the American ambassador at that time, I am going to help the war effort. And my help will consist of preparing a typed copy of the Life Divine. This is my contribution to the war effort. So, the point I am trying to make is that the work Sri Aurobindo has done is not limited to the books he wrote, is not limited to the philosophy that he developed, is not limited to the ashram he built. He lived for the world, unknown to the world. The work that he has done is of that tremendous significance. And Savitri gives us some glimpses of this great. Well, I'll come back to this and we'll continue. So once again, a happy birthday, Don.
Thank you very much. My birthday was 21st of June, 41.
Oh, I see. 41.
21st of June.
41, I see.
It was the day of Mother Visita.
Oh, right, yeah.
And 21st of June, 14, 1-4, is the day that Arya was started.
Mhm.
That's what you were saying.
Yeah.
It was the first World War.
Yeah.
Instead of invading Ukraine,
Yeah.
it was like
Yes, right.
Russia.
Yeah.
Like you very rightly said about India disintegrating itself. Looking at Savitri in the life divine, every sunny or birth must be vibrating with this knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Because this has not been recognized
Yeah.
by India at large.
Yeah.
Today we find in Kashmir, today I was in India, there's a genocide going on where all the Hindu temples, all the knowledge being desiccated. What I'm saying is when you describe what is spirituality, it is the combination of Arjuna and Lord Krishna. Incognito, the self which is incognito, Arjuna is being listen. And Aurobindo also says in one of the cantos, I am Durga. I've come to crush the ego. That part of all the philosophies that I've heard, of all the religions being preached, this is the main part which has been not mentioned by such distinguished and prominent speakers. Because there is so much evil in the whole of Bharat. If this is not being crushed, Bharat will remain normal.
So I don't normally talk about these things. As I said yesterday itself, I will try not to bring in India too much, but it does come in a great deal. You see, what has happened in India is a concerted attempt being made to marginalize Sri Aurobindo and Vivekananda. And if you ask the intellectual community, even in Calcutta, if you go to any university in Calcutta, they will say, we do recognize Sri Aurobindo and Vivekananda were great people, but they were Hindu leaders. Which is saying that Vivekananda is the same thing as some Maulana in some masjid. That's the equivalent. We have paid our due to Sri Aurobindo, that's about it. And we are paying the price for it. Yesterday I was mentioning on Hindu-Muslim unity. Nobody has written with greater clarity, with greater conviction. And I am not a student of history. When I went to India after several years in Singapore, I was disturbed by what I saw and started looking into Sri Aurobindo, what has he said. And what he has said about the Hindu-Muslim problem is amazing. But one thing he said, we are trying to make minorities into a political problem. These minorities is not a political problem, it's a national problem. Muslims have the same problem as Hindus have. Unemployment, education, lack of opportunities, you see, and you can't solve them by political compromises. This is exactly what we are doing. And now, unfortunately, for 40 years, I don't want to talk about all these things. The one great thing happened in the last 40 years is a systematic downgrading of anything of value in the Indian spiritual tradition. Nehru did it systematically. Nehru was basically a leftist. Nehru had kind of vague enthusiasm, for what is called brotherhood, love, etc. But he has no appreciation, he had absolutely no appreciation of anything in spiritual tradition. If any man benefited from the act of Nathuram Godse, it was Nehru. For 40 years he lambasted Indian tradition, Indian spirituality. Now people are realizing it is wrong. Now slowly things are coming up, and there is something very, very peculiar about the Indian psyche. I give you a small example, and it's not very serious, but it conveys the message of what I want to do. When I was in Singapore, that I found there was a Sindhi association. Nice building, nice organization. There is a Punjabi association, there is a Tamil association, there is a Gujarati association, there are various kinds of associations. There is a Brahma Kumari association, there is a Ramakrishna association. There was also a Hindu association which had no building of its own, which had no funds. If they wanted to hold a meeting, they would go around asking, can you lend your hall? So you are all Gujaratis, we are Sindhis, we are, but we are not. We are the only people who are ashamed of being Hindus, ashamed of professing our religion. Our religion never said hurt people professing other religions. We were the first ones to welcome Christians, we were the first ones to welcome the Jews, we were the first ones to welcome Muslims. And the world sits in judgment over us and teaches us how we have to be secular. This is a sad thing. You are saying right, but it takes time. A nation has to rise, and I am sure the next millennium is going to be your millennium and mine.